Working Cows Podcast, episode 397. This episode is brought to you by South Dakota Grassland Coalition. This episode is also brought to you by Ranch Right.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios. And this episode is brought to you by the South Dakota Grassland Coalition. Coming up this Thursday, December 5th, 2024, at the Rushmore Holiday Inn in Rapid City, South Dakota, the 2024 annual South Dakota Grassland Coalition meeting and convention. This year, new for this year is the convention. Dr. Tom Knopfsinger, Natalie Kavorik, and myself will all be there speaking. And I will be talking about leadership and how we develop our leadership skills to provide leadership to all of our resources. Dr. Tom is doing 2 breakout sessions and a keynote. I'll also be doing a keynote session, and I'm going to be talking about leadership according to Jesus, and we'll be looking at the Sermon on the Mount and some of the leadership lessons that we can learn from there. So if you're interested in that, you can check out the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/397, or go to South Dakota Grassland or sdgrass.org and look at all that's going on and get registered for the first full-day convention that will be part of the South Dakota Grassland Coalition's annual meeting, and get to connect with Dr. Tom Knopfsinger, Natalie Kavorik, and myself. We'll hope to see you there. Very excited to be joined today by Eric Fuchs. He is an educator with Understanding Ag, but he's also a farmer, a rancher from Missouri, and we're going to talk to him about the growth and diversification of his operation over the years and some of the ways that they've been going about getting more and more diversity on the landscape. So, Eric, thanks again for joining me on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Clay. I always enjoy being on here.
Yeah. Well, and I think in planning some other episodes we were doing together, just the subject of what's going on there at your place came up, and kind of what you guys were up to and some of the journey that you've been on. So I was like, well, that sounds like a great topic of discussion for an episode sometime, and here we are. So tell me a little bit about your context. You're with Understanding Ag, so I'd probably get in trouble if I didn't start by asking you about your context. But
that's part of it. We all get in trouble from Gabe if we don't sell our context, don't we? So, yeah, without going back too far, I've always, been involved with farming. We had a family farm for years. It was pretty diversified, and when I was 28, I bought my own operation. But to kind of back up, kind of my first aha moment on the different realms of agriculture is in my senior year in Mizzou at University of Missouri. I got to meet Jim Garish, and that was kind of the time the MIG or intensive grazing stuff came over, and it really changed my overall way of looking at things and what can be done. And just kind of went from there, always searching. I later on, I got trained in holistic management with Kurt Gadzia, under Savory's bunch, and kind of went to another level of high density grazing, more frequent moves, things like that. And it was about probably 15 years ago or so. I had known Doug Peterson for a while, and I talked myself into some soil health training for one of the NRCS classes and got to go to Dave Brantz and got trained in soil health. And that was really just like the culminating. I say that it was the culminating of, hey, what's the next thing? What's the next aha? And honestly, I think the biggest growth has been since I started with UA and as a consultant, and really seen different things with rest periods and grazing different species. So just it's all kind of helped with the culmination. We've always pretty well been in the grazing business, multi-species business, but it's really neat to continue to learn, and see that transition from what we've done with management intensive grazing now to longer rest periods. I'm still learning. Every place I go and do a consult, I come back and look at my own place and say, wow, I can implement some of this here and change some of this here. So constant learning.
No doubt. Do you think that there was ever things that you had to leave behind from one of the previous sources of learning, or was it kind of no, we're just deeper down the rabbit hole, so to speak?
I think it was a combination of both. One thing I probably have left behind from the grazing standpoint, at least here from the context of Missouri, we were always, our rest periods were too short.
Mm.
And, we were taught a lot of that 30-day, keep everything vegetative. And I'll never forget, it ended years ago when I went to the holistic management class, and Kurt Gadzia was like, well, you need to graze for what you want, not for what you have. And I just never really clicked on me. And I know that sounds funny to some people, but I'm like, okay. And we had Bermuda grass and fescue, and anything after 30 days, well, it's just going to go backwards. So what really the aha thing in the last 10 years, or probably closer to the last 4 or 5 years, was that rest periods. Until you get those rest periods, and I think it doesn't matter what environment you're in, and the fact that probably every place I go, including my own, we were always a little overstocked,
Mm.
and that was based off usually economics. So, yeah, I don't know that we so much leave anything behind, but we definitely look at it in a bigger way. And honestly, again, with UA and the six principles, once you start looking at that and how they apply, then that really makes the whole thing open up for you see the real why of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that being overstocked and just the longer rest periods, I think, is the thing that, when this closer relationship with understanding ag that I've had with them over the last year and a half or 2 years now, that has been the thing that I think is clicking, for me more than anything, is that most of the places UA consults on are overstocked, and most of them don't have a long enough rest period. So are there any processes that you have gone through to decide what is an appropriate rest period? How do you manage and monitor those kinds of things?
For me, I think it's evolving, especially when you go to a place that has been overstocked and underrested for a while. Sometimes that stocking rate's going to have to back off, and then the rest, and especially in our area when we're trying to get some of these native warm seasons to establish it. And really, there's not a place that I have not consulted from east to west, north to south, that we don't have the natives that have not been there in the past in some way. So I think starting out, that rest has to be pretty long at the right time to start getting some of these natives in our area. That may be, at the very least 90 days, but maybe 6 months to a year. But what I find is that we start getting some of those warm seasons established, then they're actually very forgiving, but we just have to manage a little bit more. And not only that, I think our stocking rate's going to go back up and probably exceed what we thought we were uh, being overstocked before. So starting out, I think it may be a little more painful, and but then in the long haul, as we get these diversities, and diversity is key. We teach it every day, and then we start seeing it in our own place. Once you get that diversity with those longer rest periods, then the stocking rate continues to go up. And I don't think we've actually seen where we might be able to go. I think we've been so degraded for so long. I don't think we even know what's capable out there under really, really good management.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's another thing. Talk to anybody in soil health, and they'll tell you we don't know what the upper limit is. I mean, we don't know how good it can get, and that's because, frankly, because most of us, and myself included, are on a degraded resource. And so we gotta just continue to do what's right for the underground livestock and let them continue to express themselves and just see it continue to improve over time. So, yeah, we've got the context in Missouri there. What are the enterprises? What are some of the things that you guys are doing there from an enterprise perspective?
So we, once we really started down the road of different type of grazing, and then kind of started seeing the economic side of it, we sold our cattle herd a long time ago. It's probably been 20 years ago now, and started contract grazing. And of course, in the last year or so, I've went to ranching for profit, and you see a lot of folks that go down that road as well. And we contract grazed every class of livestock, from registered animals to stocker cattle to dry cows to just about everything you can imagine. And I tell you what, if you want to, I always joke, if you want to learn how bad we have messed up cows, start contract grazing and see all the different, I've done Corriente, Longhorn, and it's amazing to see all the variation of cattle and even variation within breeds. It's just crazy. So a lot of contract grazing. About 15 years ago, we got into the hair sheep, and I always joke my worst year in sheep has been better than my best year in cattle. you know, economically, there was just no comparison. Definitely a learning curve. I've killed sheep in about every way that you can cause them to
I
die.
doubt it. I doubt it.
Yeah, you've got some of me, do you? But economically, just good. Definitely take more management. But they have really been good to us. But yeah, I joke I'm going to write a book, 101 Ways to Kill a Sheep. So as soon as you go on the road and leave for 2 or 3 days, you'll come in. You're like, oh, that's a new way.
That's a
But
new one.
but
Yeah.
they've been very good at us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
so that's kind of been our main enterprises.
yeah. And that's very similar to our place as well. If I had it dialed in the way I want it, it would be sheep during, year-round sheep, resident sheep herd, and custom grazing cattle in the growing season. So that's kind of been our path that we've been pursuing. Anyways, we're not totally where we want to be with the sheep yet, but yeah, that's where we're trying to get. What does your place look like as far as the contours and how are you just approaching setting up infrastructure and some of those things?
So we've got a pretty nice place. It's bottom ground. It's pretty flat. We do flood. We're along a river, but we did go with the typical NRCS grazing system that we've had about 25 years. I think like 42 permanent paddocks and water sources in each thing, tire tanks. Missouri is blessed with great cost share. I've traveled around the country again, and we've got the soil and water tax plus NRCS, and we've had some of the best NRCS guys that come from Missouri. We can talk about Doug Peterson, Mark Kennedy, and some of these guys. So definitely some good names. And with the sheep, we usually added another one or two strands to try to rotate the sheep. But I think in the realm I'm at now, I probably wouldn't try to rotate sheep quite so intensively. It is definitely easier to do it with cattle. But we've got some portable infrastructure we can put in we want because there's no doubt the NRCS grazing systems kind of puts you into a prescription, but at the same time they're very flexible to be able to say, hey, I'm on leave for 3 days and leave cattle in a paddock. And a lot of polywire when we were really grazing heavy and moving cattle once and twice a day. But we've got a good system to start out to really be able to move cattle with single strand wires. And as I was in the sheep business more, we did go add small woven wire around the outside because it just makes you sleep better at night.
Yeah.
We tried electric, but sheep were on the neighbors a little bit more than they should have. So we did go with the woven wire.
What have been some of the keys to improvements over time for you, do you think? I mean, some of the things, just kind of where did the place start and how have you seen it improve over time, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think that's biggest has come through the grazing management. Like I said, sheep are kind of hard on a pasture. I worked a little too hard probably and got overstocked with sheep. I think that, in Missouri, there's a magic number about two ewes per acre along with running cattle. I think works pretty good. You see a lot of talk about, oh, we can run 6, 7, 8 sheep, per every cow. And that just didn't work for me, both with parasites and it just didn't seem to work as well. Hard on the ecology. So those improve. Even with the consulting side, all the improvements seem to be in the grazing management, and that goes for myself too. I think just a better job of monitoring when you're moving them, better job of tracking full recovery. Grazing to get some of the warm seasons and different things. So I've steadily seen improvement with pasture diversity. Our place doesn't probably look the most cleaned place that you ever see. We've started letting some trees grow in paddocks, definitely a lot of forbs and a lot of other stuff. But we've seen one of the things we've done lately is start monitoring our progress through wildlife. Wildlife, insects, bird populations, and I think that's a huge indicator of how good of a job you're doing. And so we've really got into more of that of the pollinator stuff, not in separate areas, but just the whole place as a whole. And so I think it's a really good way to monitor where you're going.
Are there specific challenges that you faced, that you were struggling with along the way that you had to overcome to see these improvements?
The hardest thing, especially starting out young, was overcoming the economics that you thought you had to have to make it work. And I really found that out when I got out of the hay business and we got out of the owning cattle business. The economics you started seeing were all about the expense side, not the income side. And so it's hard to be a good grazer when you're overstocked. It's hard to be a good grazer when you're economically spending too much money on other stuff. And it's really funny. There's a lot of places we go work with individuals and they're wanting to know what they need to do to improve soil health, and I'm looking over here going, well, what can we do to improve your overall economics? Because once we do that, then the soil health improves. And so once I kind of got that more dialed in, and they could get the correct stocking rate, then the improvements really started in the ecology. And I know I'm kind of answering your question in a backwards way here, but that was I think is the biggest thing for me to overcome, and for anybody, is trying to understand basic economics that actually will dial in with the ecology to get where you be. Otherwise, you just constantly degrading your resource, and the economics get worse and worse and worse. So finding that sweet spot, and then I think just continuing on, and things will continue to get better, and economics thing get better.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible to graze to the detriment of ecology and economics. Obviously, that I think everybody understands that, but it's also possible to maximize the ecology to the detriment of the economics, right? I mean,
Yes.
and so I think we got to, like you said, find that balance, find that sweet spot, and do both as well as we can, right?
You can't, and there is a sweet spot, and that sweet spot's different for everybody, every place you go, and every, because we always say you can't be sustainable if you don't own the farm, if somebody else is going to buy it from you. And so
Yeah.
that does become, and as you get older, things change a little bit. The means sometimes get better, and so but there's no better indicator on how you're doing normally sometime with the ecology, because they just both go together. Without one, they're not separate. Without one, the other suffers no matter what.
Would you do anything different? Would you do anything different than when you're talking about infrastructure development or any of those things that you did in the past? Are there things that you think, oh man, that's in the wrong place, or I wish we would have done that differently?
If I was here full time and not traveling, what I'd done different, I would probably have no fences at all. I would have a main fence right through the middle of my farm, and a main water line right through the middle of the farm, so I could be completely adaptive. And I totally agree with that. These systems that are, while they're wonderful and neat, they do put you into a system that it's so hard to get
Mm.
out of. And so there's nothing more fun. There's nothing more uh, good for the ecology is a good adaptive grazing system. So yeah, I would have probably very few fences except perimeter, and use polywire movement for everything. But it's not realistic. But I think that is always your best gain, both economically and ecology wise. Is being able to keep those cattle or sheep moving often and tight.
Do you have a distance you're willing to build polywire fence in that context?
There's nothing like one good roll, and probably the one good reel with one thing, and those double ones are awful hard. They get harder to carry around all the
Yeah.
time. But honestly, no, and I always say polywire is like a blank artist. Like, you can do whatever you want with it. You can go everywhere with
Yeah.
it. And, one of the things we always wanted to do more than we had was grades up in the woods, trying
Mm-hmm.
to get some silvopasture established. And so I think, it's, when you look at my context compared to some of those guys out west or even up in your area, when you talk about building a polywire 2 or 3 miles, it becomes a little, so, but I think putting together that initial infrastructure, 95% of your work should be in your recliner, in front of your computer, building that out. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like building a house. As soon as you drive the last nail, you wish you'd done something different. So, my recommendation to anybody is keep it as portable as you can starting out, learn it, and then learn your place, learn what works best, what grazes best, and then build a limited infrastructure around that, because it's still nice to be able to leave for a week and not have to worry about anything.
Yeah, I've heard people say if you find yourself building the same fence in the same spot year after year, you could probably put it in permanently to save labor. And I think there's some truth in that. But that what you described is what we have. We've got a spine fence with the water line running in underneath it, and then the tanks are evenly spaced throughout it, and then we're polywire off of that out to the edges, and so it ends up being a quarter of a mile that we're building, because we're in a half section, and so we have 1 mile by half a mile, so we have that quarter mile stretch of polywire, which is a 15-minute job with or maybe 20-minute job with one wire. When you start trying to do 2 wires for sheep, it gets a little bit more. It becomes a little more than that, but I think it's worth it, and so that's what we're really trying to get that dialed in this year, and have been having success with it, and so looking forward to the next growing season and seeing how that goes, because I think we're going to be mostly sheep, very few cows next year, given the fall that we're having as far as moisture and some of those things are concerned. It's not looking like we're going to have a lot of extra grazing days for custom grazing cattle next year, I don't think, but we'll see. Never know. Spring's a long
Never
time
say
away.
never.
Yeah.
I always say cattle are a necessary evil to keep your sheep pasture in good shape, right? I love grazing cows, but yeah, I think you have to have some cows to graze in front of sheep to kind of keep pastures where they need to be. So yeah, I love that infrastructure like that.
Graze it down with the cows and graze it up with the cows and graze it down with the sheep. Is that what you're thinking?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, there's just nothing that can do some destruction and density and stuff like that, like cows do. And so I think, once a year, maybe once every 2 years, to be able to really knock it down good with a cow, and then use the sheep for the money maker. But like you said, in good years, there's one, I don't like to give Gabe any more credit than I have to, but but there's one quote that he said that I've used over and over and over, that stock, and it's what you're talking about right now. You stock for your worst year and add livestock, instead of stocking for your best year and take away. And that's what we see around our area. But again, with the contract grazing, being able to bring cattle in and out in certain parts of the country, it's really easy to be able to do that. That is the way to keep things going in the right direction. So I like what you're talking about with that. It really, and again, on dry years, you just graze your sheep.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Ranch Right. Death, taxes, and paperwork. Ranch Right can help you avoid one of them. If you're a successful business, then you are probably paying some taxes. But that doesn't mean you have to be stuck inside preparing your paperwork for the accountant. Enlist the team of financial experts at Ranch Right to get you back outside doing more of what you love. They're committed to providing you with actionable financials so that you can build a profitable business and create generational wealth. While some things in life are inevitable, being mystified by your numbers doesn't have to be one of them. If you're ready to entrust the paperwork to a team that actually enjoys this type of stuff, then visit ranchrightllc.com and get back outside to the things that you enjoy. Are there ways to reduce labor on those more portable systems like we have? Are there things that you've seen people do that help with reducing that labor?
You've probably seen it too. Farmers and their ingenuity on stuff with side-by-sides or kids is good too, right? But I had a joke before. You ever heard, if you want to know how good your grazing system is, leave for 3 days, let your wife move cattle, and you realize really how good it is. But there's so many things on four-wheelers or side-by-sides, or some of the there is some of the people that are using the no fence, and I think there's some technology to be had on some of this to really. I think there still needs to be the human aspect in there, but I think there's things coming that are going to make it even easier with technology on portable collars, fence and stuff like that. Plus, like you mentioned, all the things that can go on side by sides to make it easy. But what you said, 15 minutes, 15 minutes twice a day is pretty good money when you talk about moving cattle or moving sheep.
Right. Yeah. Yep. For sure. And I think that is the challenge, is just keeping track of those economics. I've always used the excuse of uh, moving cows, building polywire is kind of like decompression for me. It's a mental health thing for me to go out there and just do something that is repetitive, where I'm just walking, making steps, stepping in posts. That's good for my brain. But I don't think everybody should look at it that way, or maybe should make sure that there's more. They're getting paid well for that, and I think that is one of the challenges with a more portable system is just the labor. If you're paying yourself, it can become a challenge that way for sure.
It can, but I tell you what, like you said, that I don't think anybody that's got into moving cattle, you hear the same thing you're saying, just how, but I think one of the intangibles you get for it is an observation.
Yeah.
Being able to go out and look at the pastures, walk across them, look at the insects, look at the animals. And we have lost that ability. That's one of the hardest things for us. And you've heard us teach at our academies is the power to stop and look and observe and see what's going on. And that is one thing moving cattle like this, building polywire does. I think it's hard to even put a price tag on that ability and the time to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of my biggest takeaways from the Soil Health Academy is every day you're out in the field and they just stand there and keep asking you, what do you see? What do you see? What do you observe? Until you're tired of hearing them ask that. But you never run out of things to see and observe and notice, and they teach you to use all five senses. I'll never forget standing in a cover crop field and pulling up one plant that was still photosynthesizing and smelling the root zone of that plant, and then pulling up the one next to it that wasn't and smelling the root zone of that plant. It's like, ooh, that's a different smell for sure. And you can notice that. And so just getting out there and noticing what you're noticing, that's the big part of it.
And it's funny, we just had a guy from North Missouri reach out to us today and was noticing all the cows or the birds moving with these cattle, things that he had never seen. They're just really getting into more frequent moves. He was cutting these beans and he was talking about all the spider webs he was seeing, and we just, me and one of the other consultants were just like, man, that's what we're trying to see. And then it just snowballs into other things. And we have lost that power in not just livestock or agriculture, but a lot of things, just to be able to see what's in front of us. And it's something, once you start looking again and seeing again, it becomes a whole new world.
Yeah. I think a lot of it goes back to that whole trust the experts thing, right? And we think we're not the expert on our place. We get that, oh, there's somebody else that's smarter than me. They probably drive a little white pickup and they'll sell me something that'll make this place really hum, but no, there shouldn't be. You should be the expert on your own place.
Well, and then we've turned a lot of our decisions based off what they see over to the experts, and
right.
Fast forward 20, 30 years, and that's why we see the economics we do in agriculture.
Yep.
We're turning a lot of decisions that used to be made both agronomically and in an animal husbandry aspect to somebody else that says they're, going to make us a lot more money if we pay them this.
Yep. And I'm not discounting the need for inviting other people in, letting other people look at things and see things with their eyes and from their perspective and say, hey, why are you doing that? Well, I don't know. It's the way I figured out to do it. It might be the worst way to do it, but it's the way I figured out to do it. And you can show me the way to cut the time it takes to do it in half, or whatever. But still, all I'm saying is that when we talk about trusting the experts, it hasn't netted good results for the farmer or rancher. It's been really good for ag business, and yes. It's time for us to figure out how to claw some of that capital back, because there's a lot of it there.
Absolutely agree. Mm-hmm.
Actually, the amount of dollars in agriculture, I don't think has probably changed. Just how much of the share of that piece of the pie that the agriculturalists themselves is getting is what's really changed.
Yeah, and we've turned a lot of that over, like you said, voluntarily.
Yeah, so what do you think have been some of the lessons you've learned being on other people's places? I mean, just like you said, the time you've been with Understanding Ag has been one of those things that's really opened up a lot of things to you. What have been some of those key takeaways that have helped you on your own operation?
The probably one of the biggest things is no matter where you go, the problems are really the same. And
Mm.
it was funny, we had some consultants down in Uruguay and Argentina last week, and they were discussing the same thing, overgrazed, underrested. And then also, what I've really learned is it doesn't matter whether you're in a 10-inch rainfall environment. Now, I know some people, when I tell them what my rainfall, they'll be like, yeah, that's easy for you to say, but are a 60-inch rainfall environment, it's the effective rainfall is what is. And I joke that we in our area are in a green desert.
Mm.
We might get 45 inches of rain a year, but we're lucky if we can keep 10 or 15.
Yeah.
And I've really seen that, just based off some different happenings in our life. We have destocked a little bit, and we had a lot longer rest period in our own operation, and then we had row crops on either side as a heavy tillage, and we really saw effective rainfall. We would get a 3 or 4 inch deluge, and we wouldn't even have water standing, and we would have it running off the neighbors. And so that's the biggest thing I have learned. It is, because I've gone down the road of I've tried every new grass, every new thing that you could spray. I've done it all. I've got a little pasture irrigator. I was going to drill wells. I got Bermuda grass. I used to heavily fertilize, and it all is just a symptom, and it's like, why would I want to, irrigate when I get 45 inches of rain a year? Yeah, we may have some dry put. So that's the things, is the stocking rate, the rest, and the rainfall, and the effectiveness of the rainfall and what it does. And it's been humbling going to other people's operations. When you first, I've been here 3.5 years, and you first start this job, you're just full of it. You can't wait to run to everybody's place and tell them what they should be doing on their place. And then you go back home and say, okay, now you go do that. And then you go to places and people that are a lot older than you, that's been doing things that's worked for a long time. And you just find different ways of, and again, you take those experiences those people have, you take them and you come back to your own location and say, okay, what am I not doing? And so rainfall, rest, and stocking rate has been my biggest learning to come back to my own place, because it is a problem all over the country, and in fact all over the world.
Yeah. What has been the timeline of change for you? Have you seen it ebb and flow? Have there been kind of times where you saw it really ramp up? What's that look like for you on your operation?
It's yeah, it's funny. It's every little thing have done. You see a real quick bump, and then maybe sometimes you plateau out. And from my standpoint, it's because I didn't have all the principles in. And when we started a grazing system from continuous grazing, you see that big jump. And then it kind of evens out a little bit. And then I started doing some high density grazing. Bam, it jumped up a little bit. But I will have to say, I'm partial, until you started seeing those 6 principles and using them all, I think you keep hitting plateaus. And so now I think it always ebbs and flows, but the trend needs to constantly be going up at least. And I think that's kind of what we've seen now, is the trend is always up, but nature's going to be up and down. Organic matter is going to go up and down, but on a year basis, as you see in droughts or whatever, but the trend needs to be continued up, and that's what we've seen, the change and the trend getting better all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. What principles do you think you were missing?
Definitely diversity. Definitely diversity. We're in an area we can grow fescue all year long, but armor as well. Always overgrazed, and that is that third. Again, you go back to that 30-day rest, is what we were taught, 30 to 45 days. You don't have armor. You're definitely not going to have diversity, and that was, we had livestock. We didn't disturb for the most part, but we were using large amounts of fertilizer and a lot of stuff we did too. And so we had disturbance. So, but what I find, probably, if I had to pick a couple out, especially in the grazing world, it's armor and diversity is the two that, just because, again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get that water cycle better. We're trying to build that aggregate. If I don't have armor on that soil, I'm never going to build that aggregate. Okay, so I finally get armor. Now I'm starting up the road a little bit, but if I don't get that diversity in, because fescue, we're lucky if we can get down 12 inches with fescue. These warm seasons, these natives, we might get down 2 or 3 foot.
Mm.
But again, I need both those in a system, and that's what's been really neat. I quit fighting trying to get rid of, the amount of money that's been spent trying to eradicate fescue in our area is just unbelievable. When I quit trying to fight it, I started getting fescue and warm seasons in the same pasture. Same thing with Bermuda grass. You're not going to kill it. I've got it. I've planted it. But as I started those rest periods more, I started getting warm season natives in Bermuda grass. We cut all the fertilizer out. So, but those things, diversity and armor, are by far the number ones in most grazing operations that are the missing link.
What do you think is the key to getting that diversity to come in? Is it just not grazing the same place at the same time year after year, or what are some of the ways that you see that happening?
I'll answer that question with the scenarios of how we see mainly in the East in our area. The reason we're so cool season dominant is because we graze very hard in the fall. We graze it down to nothing. We turn in on April 15th or earlier in the spring as soon as we start getting green up. And that is the only type of plants that are going to be able to survive under those type of grazing conditions. So to help with those, we bring in some different fescues, or we bring in Bermuda grasses again, or you get a flush of a lot of bluegrass. And so the way that has been changed is not only about the adaptiveness of your grazing, changing it up, but then it's those rest periods put together. The Eastern United States was not all predominantly cool season. I mean, it wasn't. The natives were all around in our area, just like they were out west, just in a different, and so our grazing patterns and what I've seen, especially from in our type of environment and context, we are in a constant flood drought cycle. I mean, we get 3 inches overnight, it'll all run off 2 weeks later, we're in a drought. And that is because of lack of diversity, of lack of infiltration, because of good aggregate. And so that is the missing point. So it's the adaptiveness to answer it. It's adaptiveness, and it's the ability to rest at the right times to get that diversity in.
Yeah. Have you seen diversity of livestock increase diversity in the paddock, do you think?
That's a tough one, because I think sheep really have to be managed in a very, very good way, or they can't, there was a reason the sheep were hated out the West, and so I can't say, but you can then take that diversity and grazing it correctly can continue to have a benefit from it, because sheep are so much more foragers, and I'm able to really do a better brush control management if I want to as sheep. So I don't know that it adds, other than it gives you more tools in the toolbox to be able to graze certain things at a certain time. But because, as you probably know, sheep can actually, they can make a really beautiful pasture with nothing but grass and clover, with no forbs or anything else. So I think, just like with any other species, based off how I manage them, the rest periods I'm getting, and when I'm grazing, is going to be that. So graze correctly, I think, absolutely, yes.
What else do you see as commonalities for grazers as far as the challenges that they're facing and the way that they have been able to overcome them?
I think as I travel around, we've put a lot of, one of the things, I think we've put a lot of emphasis on genetics and proper cattle and trying to breed certain things in cattle. When I think, again, what I've seen always, every operation I've ever been to, the low-hanging fruit is always grazing management. So another thing I think I've learned in the last 3 years, Dr. Williams helped a lot with this, is on the epigenetic side. I think there's a lot to be said in operations to make their grazing better, to be able to have cattle or sheep that are adapted to their type of management, their type of environment. So I think it's a big missing piece of the puzzle. We try to, like I said, breed in a lot of tolerance. That there was a thing for a while for tolerance to fescue, making animals tolerant to fescue. And I don't disagree with that. But how about, let's just get, the problem is it's a lack of diversity. And so while grazing management, no matter where I go in the country, is always the number one low-hanging fruit, I think the second one is putting less emphasis on what those cows what they look like, in other words, than how they manage on your property. And I've really seen that with sheep. I think it's even as more important with sheep, as having a type of animal that's going to work under your management. Both the low-hanging fruits. Yeah.
I think the type of animal that's going to work under your management is the one that continues to get pregnant year after year without help. Is it as simple as that?
It really is. And I tell you, so I'll turn a lot of people when I talk about this, but for about 2 years I grazed a herd of Corriente cattle. And again, If you want to know how bad we've screwed up genetics or screwed up cattle, then go graze a herd of Corriente cattle. And so that animal itself may not, or breed may not, but what we're looking at, but what I know from that breed, there was never any problems. There was never eye problems, feet problems, calving problems, 100-degree. We're in a continental climate. 100 degrees, they're out there. They're never standing in water. They're never suffering. They breed back every year. And so that doesn't have to be the Corriente, but that's what we're looking for. That is the number one criteria is that animal's breeding and having a calf every year unassisted. And the longevity, and that anybody that's been around ranching for profit, when you see the numbers of the longevity of cattle, my goodness gracious, the average calf or average, number of calves a cow will have in its lifetime. So again, another little low-hanging fruit that I think we probably never look that helps economics right within what we can do right there without ever spending anything or doing anything different.
Yeah, and so the resilience of the Corianes is what you're talking about, right? I mean, it's not.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what they are proving how bad we've messed up other breeds because of their ability to survive.
Yeah, they do everything unassisted.
Right.
And so like I said, when I've grazed so many different classes of livestock and types and breeds and everything else, and another quote by a gentleman, Joe Hopping, you've probably heard of Joe, said there's more variations within breeds than there are breeds themselves. And that's what I really saw with contract grazing. You could get a set of Angus cows that did wonderful on grass, gained like gangbusters on grass without any supplements, and you'd see other herds that wouldn't do any good at all. So it's about breeding those animals where they work. Breeding and it works on the farm, on our ranch, under our management, as a low-cost producer, and not worry about what's on the other end. The best thing we can do is sell a live calf that has not cost us much to make.
What do you think, kind of shift gears a little bit, what do you think about the next generation of ranch managers and how, where are we at there? Are we going to bring in this new crop? Is there excitement out there to come back to the operations, or is it something that we're going to struggle to continue to find the next generation coming in?
What's interesting question, because next week Brian Doherty are both going for their second year in a row to the FFA National Convention in Indianapolis. They've got a sustainability section. They asked us to come set up a booth. And I'm sure I'm off on my numbers, but this is just my observation. We were out there last year. I would say 70 to 75% of the attendees, both teachers and students, are women, and probably close to the same percentage do not have a lot of ag background. They're not cows and plows like it used to be. So things are going to change whether we like it or not, just by looking at that.
Yeah.
I think the opportunity in agriculture is probably better than it has ever been. And the challenges are probably more than they've ever been, and the biggest challenge is how do young producers get in based off current land prices, based off input prices. You shouldn't have to go in debt by millions of dollars to try to get in the livestock business. But I think things are changing, and I think if you're willing to almost do the opposite of what everybody mainstream is doing and doing different, and I think this regenerative route is the way to do it. And we can look at it from an ecological standpoint, but again, economics is what it's doing. So I think there's a lot of new faces that are going to come to agriculture. It's going to have a wholesale shift. I hope places get smaller. I hope farms get smaller. I hope, we have that type of rural America come back. But it's going to change one way or the other in the next 4 or 5 years, just because of age and the amount of people that are getting out of it. I mean, how many cattle producers are getting out right now because of high cattle prices and will never get back in? So I don't know what these changes are going to look like. I think we both know the Farm Bill has a huge impact on what we see on the landscape. With a couple strokes of the pen, I think we can change across the country what we see, the sizes of farms, what's raised on farms and ranches, and the age and people that are going to be in it.
What do you think, or what are the indicators that give you confidence or give you hope that now there's more opportunity in agriculture than ever?
I think because the consumer is more and more of a driver of what's happening.
Yeah.
And I always say if we say there's, you know, if we want to change things and change it really quick, the change is going to come from the farmer rancher, but the change is going to be pushed from the consumer and hopefully not, but possibly by the regulators as well. You know, there's a lot of people, and you know, you had my wife on before, and there's a lot of people she's working with, a lot of people that's saying no more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not eating food raised like it is. So I think there's a huge opportunity for the consumer to be able to push things in a certain way that I think can actually be very positive, both from an economic and an ecological standpoint.
Yeah, and I think you see that impulse goes one of two ways. They're either becoming homesteaders, which is good, or they're just changing the way they buy food, and they're, you know, farmers markets and all those things. I was just talking to a guy the other day, and he said, when I started changing the way I ate, he said, I went and it was John Moody on the podcast. The episode will be out by the time this one comes out, but he said, I was going to this farmer's market on Monday, and I was going to a back alley and buying raw milk on Tuesday, and I was going to this farmer's market on Thursday, and he said, I just recreated hunter-gatherer. That's all I did, is I became a new kind of hunter-gatherer. So he decided to start buying his food differently. But yeah, I think that definitely, I think the consumer has become aware of how food is produced, and right, wrong, or indifferent, they don't like it necessarily, and so they're going to pursue either growing it themselves or sourcing it themselves from people who they can look in the eye and say, how was this raised? So what's your sheep marketing process like?
You know, it's interesting. We had talked a lot about trying to finish them and to sell them off farm, but our market is so good. You know, we lambed and you know what I'm talking about, lambed in the May time frame, and November, December, the ethnic markets. You know, last time we sold any great numbers was $3 a pound off the farm. The way we do add value is I'll call the local sale barns, because you've dealt with sheep barns. They can be a different animal to try to deal with sometimes, and we'll call them and have them bid on them right on the farm. So we you know, don't take any shrink, we don't take any commission, and I just never myself felt like there was any enough value for me to take, especially my animals that would take a long time to get up to 100 pounds, 110 pounds, when I can sell them all farm at 50, 60 pounds for $3. You know, even $2 is still very profitable. So we got them off as quick as we could, you know, and it's worked well for us. It really has.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Anything else that you feel like this kind of is unique or sets your operation apart that you want to share?
You know, I think just being willing to be open to know that you have not figured it out, and that is probably the biggest thing. There's, as again, what humbles you as a consultant, it's like I am just scratching the bottom of trying to figure out what's out. And you know, and now with Leanne, who really doesn't have a farm background, she sees things so much different than me. I still have that garbage or that baggage that I have to try to let loose. I joke, we'll go out and see something, and she'll say, "Why do you do that?" And I'll look around and say, "Well, I don't know. Why don't you just be quiet? I don't know why I do that." You know, and so it is that humbleness to be able to come up and say, "I still don't know." And there's nothing better than, you know, I had some of the other consultants come out and look, and I had Doug Peterson come out a couple of years ago. It's like you said, that fresh eyes, that set of eyes that see something different than you, and I don't have a clue what I'm doing out here, and that's the most cool, fun thing that there is.
Yeah, for sure. Very good, Eric. Thank you for your time today.
Man, I appreciate getting on, Clay, and always enjoy this, and hope to do it again sometime.
Sounds good. Very good stuff there, as always, with Eric. Really appreciate him taking the time to join me. Looking forward to being joined by somebody from the team at Understanding Ag next week, again, to discuss what they're focusing on, some of the things that they're paying attention to, some of the things that they find important going forward for creating more profitable and successful businesses. We'll see you again real soon with another episode of the Working Cows Podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.